Ooh, that looks tasty.
Hey, isn't there supposed to be some kind of funny intro to this game or something or another? Yeah. Actually, it was probably the best one we've ever had before. I mean, award-winning voiceover introduction. Yeah, so, where is it? Oh, yeah, we actually had to send it into the past because our past selves reached out and borrowed it from us so they could have it back then, which means right now we don't actually have it anymore.
Welcome, folks. Day the Hungry Gamer is back with another game review, and today we are talking about Anachrony, designed by David Turczi and published by Mind Clash Games. And I do apologize if I mispronounced that name. And before I get going, please make sure you turn on your Klingon subtitles, because if I make any mistakes in the brief rules overview, that's where you'll find the corrections. Now, what Anachrony is it is a Euro worker placement game with a time travel twist. In this game, each player, or single player if you're playing against one of the two AIs that come with the game, is a faction in a post-apocalyptic world. And in this world, you are trying to survive, go out, gather supplies, and build new things for your faction, and so on and so on. But the core is, at some point, time travel is developed. And this time travel allows you to borrow supplies from the future. So not only are you gathering supplies and resources on the board, you can literally borrow them from the future. And then you just have to make sure that by the end of the game, you pay them back, because as you move further along in the game, further through the timeline, at some point you have to take whatever it is that you borrowed and send it back through time. And not doing this causes you to lose points and can potentially block off spaces on your player board. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. Now, if you are not interested in how this game is played and just want to jump into my final thoughts, then you want to go to the timestamp on the screen right now. For those of us still here, let's go over how this game's going to work. What's going to happen is each turn, each player will have a variety of workers that they will have drafted on their player board. I'll show you the player board in just a little bit. And they're going to be able to, one by one, play as many workers as they want. And they can play all of their workers on their player board if they have spaces, no problem. Or they can play them out here on the main board. Now, if they're going to play them on the main board, they have to have powered up an exosuit. And each faction has their own exosuits, and you can see my mediocre paint job I've done on one of them right here. And what's going to happen is, depending on what kind of worker you're using, and the four that I have out here are scientist, engineer, administrator, and down here at the bottom, genius, who can be everything, is you'll pick which one you're going to use, you take them, and you slot them into your exosuit, and then you're able to put them out on the board wherever you want, just like any other worker placement game. And as you can expect, for the most part, the spaces on the board are gathering resources of one form or another. You can come over here and go mining, in which case you're going to be able to collect two different resources from over here. It might be the mystical future element neutronium, it might be uranium, it might be gold, or it might be titanium. Of course, you're also going to be doing your best to gain water. Water is pretty much a big resource in this future apocalyptic world we're dealing with. You can come over here and you can build one of a variety of different buildings, and it might be one that lets you go power plant, lets you go back through time, it might be life support, it might be infrastructure, whatever it may be. Each one of those is represented by a different tile, and there's huge stacks of tiles that will be rotating in and out through the game as you play. You can come here to the middle, in which case it will allow you to recruit more workers to come work for you. You can come over here, which will allow you to roll the dice here, which will determine the shape and type of resource that you have found. And I'll talk about why they matter later on. As you can see, they're just different types of things that you're going to be researching there. You can come all the way over here, which is trading certain supplies for other supplies, or you can come up to the top and you can barely even see that, and you can get water. Now, also, I should point out that in almost every different place that you are recruiting, the type of worker that you use can have benefits. For the most part, every worker can use almost every location that you go to. There are some exceptions, like over here, only a scientist can do research. Over here, only an administrator can recruit a genius, and a scientist can't recruit anybody. and an administrator can't build anything. But in general, the type of work you have really only comes into play when it comes to getting bonuses. Now, I talked about the time travel aspect. And in order to illustrate that, let me set up the timeline that you have on the board the whole time. Now, this is not the whole timeline, it's actually bigger, but each one of these, with the exception of this one, represents one round of the game. And you might be playing one worker, you might be playing 6 workers as you go through. And at the beginning of each turn, a couple of things are going to happen. You're going to have the opportunity to, as I said, borrow things from the future. In which case, you simply will take 0, 1, or 2 of these little tiles here and place them out on the timeline. And that's saying that's what you're going to borrow. So in this case, green is borrowing 1 water and 1 engineer from the future. And that's all well and good. However, also at the beginning of each turn, you're going to look at the entire timeline. And the player that has borrowed the most things is going to roll the paradox die. And every time you get 4 of these paradoxes onto your player board, you will get an anomaly. And when you take an anomaly, you get one of these, which is a major penalty. Because what it's going to do is it's going to block a building space on your player board. And again, I will show you the player board in just a second. And you'll see that to get rid of it, you have to use a worker. And so here it's saying you have to spend 2 of any resource, or 1 neutronium and 2 water. And in addition to that, whatever worker you place on it is going to be killed. Or if you don't deal with it, you're going to wind up losing 3 points at the end of the game. In addition to that, you'll see that there are these other tiles that are going to be above the timeline. These are super projects that you're able to make. And you can only make the one that is in the time that you are in, the era that you are in. However, this is a game about time travel. So there is a way, if you have built some of these power plants, you can put a worker there, in this case has to be a scientist, and you can shift your focus back through time. And so you can shift your focus back through time, and then you can build one of these super projects, which give you special abilities and a whole bunch of points at the end of the game. And again, you're going to be using resources that you're gathering, you're going to be using that scientific research that you were doing, and the various shapes are going to matter depending on which kind of super project you're trying to build. Now, what's really important about the timeline is when you get here to the middle, it is called impact. And that is when a huge meteor is going to strike and ruin the world. And this is what you're trying to prepare for. You're trying to prepare for this, and then in the aftermath, become the faction that leads society moving forward. And so when it hits, you're going to flip over this tile here, and now you have something new. You have this excavate. And depending on what faction you are, it's a different set of requirements that you have to have. But when you do excavate, you're going to be able to get more and more points. And also when that happens, you're going to start losing your ability to take these actions out on the board. There'll be an extra bonus out there to start with, but once someone has taken the action, here, when they come off the board, this is going to flip over, and now that space is no longer available whatsoever. So the end game is going to be determined by 3 full rounds after impact, or when all of these spaces out here are flipped over and no longer available. That means society has fully collapsed, and we'll see who it is that's going to emerge as the new leader of the world. Now, I've been talking about the player boards that I said I was going to show you, and so here you have it. What you have is over here you have space to build 3 of these different buildings that I was talking about, and it tells you on the board how much it is that they cost. And as these are coming out, you can see you can have 3 of each, or as you get a super project, you'll see it takes up 2. But remember I was talking about those anomalies that you can get. If you get anomalies, you're covering up spaces on your board and you can't build anything. And that is particularly nasty because remember I talked about that excavate activity that you can do. That's worth a lot of points. But as you can see, this one here, I can't even take the action unless I've built 3 of these life support buildings. So if I have an anomaly blocking one of those spaces, I have a big issue. You'll also see that each player has a specific leader that will give them a minor bonus power. You can also see over here that at the beginning of each turn, you're having to power up your exosuit so you're able to use them. Some of them are free to do, but others have various costs. Like this one here, you have to use a power core to get. This one here, you have to spend 3 water or a power core, and so on and so on and so on. And you're going to get more water for every exosuit that you don't power up. So in this case, if I did this, I would get 2, 4, 6, 8 water just for not powering up any exosuits. You'll also notice, though, that after the impact, you're going to lose access to some of your stuff. In this case, I would lose access to 1, 2, and 3 with this particular faction board that I have. So now, while it was a little easier for this faction to recruit at the beginning of the game, it's a little bit harder now. And then over here, you're going to see that as you use your workers, they get tired. And so you're going to have to find a way to move them back over here to the active space. And you're going to be doing that by either spending water to refresh them, or you can just force them back to work, which is great, but that's going to move this tracker down over here, which is going to be worth less points at the end of the game. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you're scoring points in this game. You can see how happy your workers are. The more water you spent on them, the more points you're going to get. The more times you've gone back through time, the more points you're going to get. You're going to get points for every single thing that you've built, and so on and so on and so on. And at the end of the game, whoever has the most points is going to win. So, what do I like about this game? First off, I like that even though there is a lot going on, it's a fairly streamlined game. Once you learn how to play, it doesn't actually take that long. And I appreciate the massive amount of variety in this game. All I've shown you is just the core game. Nothing else in the massive infinity box that I actually backed on Kickstarter. There is a ton more. This is just the core game, and the amount of variety is huge. There are so many of these different super projects that you can do. There are so many different buildings that you can build are going to be available each turn. At the beginning of each turn, I didn't even mention, you're going to have different resources available for you to mine. You're going to have different types of workers you're going to be able to recruit, and those are going to change every single round, and you're never going to have the same combination on any given turn. Not to mention, each of these faction boards is slightly asymmetric from the others. You can play them all symmetrically, but I find that boring. I want to play the asymmetric stuff. And then you have different leaders, which is going to vary things up again, even slightly more. So the variety here is huge. And again, once you learn it, it's not very hard to play. I also appreciate that as far as a Euro game goes, the theme is pretty well realized in this. There is something deeply fun about borrowing stuff from the future, and as you're going through at some point, having to pay it back. And because of what they've done with the paradox die and rolling that every turn, it keeps you from borrowing too much stuff and keeps you on your toes and keeps reminding you, oh no, I have to send something back in a way that's not just, oh, you lose points at the end of the game. I mean, you do lose points at the end of the game if you can't pay the stuff back, but the longer you have stuff out there that has not been sent back into the past, the more likely it is you're going to get a paradox, which is worth negative points and messes up your player board, and that is fantastic. I also like the variety of things that you can do on your turn. Yes, there's plenty of things out there on the main board that you can do, and I like that depending on what type of worker you send out there is going to give you a bonus, or maybe you can't do something, that's all great. But because of the way that you're building out your player board, suddenly as you're going, the more and more things you have out here, the more and more spaces you have to put workers, which means there's more things that you can do without going out to the main board, so you don't have to power things up over here. And that just becomes a really delightful engine building exercise as you're trying to make sure you have plenty of workers, even though you're never going to send more than 6 of them out onto the board at any given time. You can have way more than that and be over here doing stuff, gathering resources, messing around with time, and so on and so forth. And that also is a lot of fun. It's very, very clever. And then the second to last thing I'll call it being something that I really think is well done is the solo AI. It is just on the edge of as complicated as I want an AI to be. You roll a die, depending what number you roll, you move some stuff around, and where you move your little token to, it's going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. And the AI goes out there and it does keep you on your toes. Sometimes it does stuff that just helps them. It doesn't really affect you. But they send out their own exosuits out there and they block you and they take things. And so you have to keep track of what they're doing. And it's not just a beat your score kind of AI. I think it's very clever. And I appreciate that it has multiple difficulty levels of that AI, which is really what I look for when I look for an AI in a Euro game. And the last thing that I'll say is there is a lot with this game. As I said, I'm only talking right now about the base game. I'm not mentioning any of the expansions. There's 2 big expansions that also come in this infinity box that you can get a hold of. And in addition, there's a whole bunch of small little modules that you can add that just slightly change things around. So even once you feel like you have accomplished this game and accomplished mastery of this game, well, then you start throwing in modules and then you start throwing in the expansions. And there's just a ton. I cannot fathom ever feeling like you have fully played this game to boredom. So what are my quibbles about the game? Well, the first one is, oh my gosh, does it take up a lot of space. This is the core game, and that's fine. But even when you're playing just by yourself, you got two of these big old boards adding onto it. And then I'm using the lovely stuff from the Infinity Box. You have this thing that you have to have out there because you need to have access to all these different tiles, and they need to be in two spaces. Then you have this timeline that you have down on the bottom, which again is more space. And then above each one of these little timeline things, you have one of those. And then you have to the side, you got all of these things here. And you have all of these things here. And you have all of these things here that you are also using. And then, of course, you have whatever X suits you didn't power up. You got those sitting around with you as well. Then, of course, don't forget, you have your little faction board and your leader, which goes right on there. That's nice. And then, of course, you have all of those guys. And, of course, you have a whole bunch of those tokens as well. And, of course, you have these two decks of cards that you need. And as you see, it's a lot of stuff. And again, it's just the core game. Every one of those modules that you add, or almost every one, adds another board to the side, and it makes it bigger and bigger and more sprawling. It's huge. And as amazing as the Infinity Box is, it does do a very good job of keeping everything in one place. It too is huge. This is a lot of game. It is intimidating, and it's also pretty expensive. Now, for what you get, it's not expensive, but it's pretty expensive if you want all of this. So just something to keep in mind. And the next thing I will say is, while I appreciate that the artwork in this game, it does illustrate some diversity, which I think is wonderful that Mindclash has some diversity in the art of the game, and that should be called out as something that is good. And I should have said that early on. That is praiseworthy. They do have some diversity in it. I wish that had spread onto the workers, because these workers are not diverse. So it would be nice to see that go a little bit further. They have it in the game. Now let's take it even further in so it becomes part of the core experience, is normalizing that diversity in gaming. And then the last thing that I will say is it can feel a little bit fiddly as you're playing, because as you can see all this stuff, there's a whole bunch of stuff, and you're resetting the mine every single round, and you're resetting your workers every single round, and you're having to spend resources to be able to use your workers every single round. You're having to spend other resources to power up these mechs so you can send the workers that you have to spend your resources to be able to use to put them in these mechs, to send these mechs out onto the board. And it can feel a little bit overwhelming. But there you have it, folks. That is Anachrony. Overall, I think this is quite a good game. This is one that if you are a fan of Euro games and you have space to put it and a table big enough to put it out on, then this is one that you should probably have in your collection. It does a lot of really, really clever things, and it does feel different than any other worker placement style game that I have in my collection right now. So there you have it, folks. That is Anachrony. If I made any errors in the rules description, please let me know in the comments with the timestamp. We'll get that into the Klingon subtitles. As always, if you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.